Welcome back to Made for More. I am your host, Holly J. Moore. I'm a divorce lawyer who is passionate about helping you to use the adversity in your life to grow and show up as the best version of yourself.
You're laughing because you know what's coming.
Is that why I'm laughing?
Yes.
Aaron, what is coming?
So she asks before we talk to a sex therapist. Yes. So you had recently mentioned on Instagram that the podcast has basically become therapy for you.
Yes.
You know, you went through like 2 months of therapy as a teenager or something, and never again until you started the podcast. And so now,
Now I'm going to be talking about my entire sex life. So stay tuned. I bet you didn't see that coming.
Nope.
Boom!
Language.
Nailed it. Mic drop.
Language. No, please don't drop the mic.
I won't drop the mic. We are joined today by Wendi Dumbroff, licensed professional counselor and sex therapist. Wendi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Holly. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I know that you have spent a while in the field of counseling and therapy, and it sounds like more recently you decided to focus and pursue a graduate degree in sex therapy. Is that correct?
Well, what I actually did was I did postgrad training in sex therapy.
Okay.
So I did postgrad training in couple and family, and realized, I loved working with couples, and I realized that if you work with couples, you work with sex. And as you know, they don't, for some reason, teach sex and couples therapy together. So I went to the Institute, gosh, I'm going to forget the name of it now, back in 2015 in Philly, under Nancy Gambesha, to do postgrad training in sex therapy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was your interest in that particular niche because of your couples work, or is there something about sex therapy that's particularly interesting other than the obvious? Like
Other than
it's just salacious and juicy.
it's kind of a nice topic. It's good party talk, right? Like what do you do? Well,
Totally.
but really it's because in working with couples, there were always sexual issues.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to address more holistically everything with all the issues that my couples would bring. And I look back now and I think about some cases I had before I learned about sex therapy that I so wish I had had this lens, just not to pathologize things that are totally normal, that I think, is probably one of the most useful pieces of being a sex therapist.
Yeah. So I'm a divorce lawyer, and so I see people on the end of the continuum of the relationship, and I know that sex is a huge issue, a huge source of conflict in relationships. But that's really all I know is like just the umbrella of sex is an issue. What types of issues do you see in your work as a couples therapist?
Yeah, great questions. There's a bunch, right? There are one of the most common issues, probably the most common issue across the board, is discrepant desire. So couples come, one person wants sex more than the other. But what happens there is that sometimes there's somebody who really is hesitant to enter into the sexual relationship for whatever reason, right? Okay. And that's part of what the therapy's about, is kind of unpacking and understanding what's happening, not just on the surface. It's not just that you're not in the mood right now, but usually there's deeper issues that sometimes people have never connected with what's happening in the present. And sometimes it has nothing to do with sex. For example, let's say, I know I've used this example many times, but it's a useful analogy. If somebody grew up in a home, let's say a woman grew up in a home that was very chaotic, maybe there was substance use, there was just, and the way that person coped was to just keep their world very organized, right? Their everything in their room was set just right. Everything is all, that's how they coped with all the chaos right outside their bedroom door. And then as an adult, perhaps it's a woman who has trouble orgasming with her partner, because orgasming and good sex is about just letting go,
Yeah.
right? But her whole coping strategy has been keeping everything together because everything was
Ah,
such a mess. So it doesn't always have to do with sex, but when you can do those kind of deep dives and understand a person's history, you can begin to kind of connect pieces and help them understand what's going on.
right. So okay, so we've talked about discrepancy in desire. Name a couple other issues that you see most often?
Yeah, different sexual styles.
Okay.
Maybe perhaps one member of the couple is kinky, but the other person isn't, and they didn't know this. They didn't share any of that before they got married, or they did, but they thought it would be okay. So
Yeah.
that's another issue that could be there.
Okay.
I think a lot along the spectrum of discrepant desire, but there could be so many different reasons.
Right.
For example, a couple comes in, someone said, "No, no, no, I really like sex. You've got that wrong." But because of everything that happens and all the conflict that happens in between, that's why I don't want to
Mm.
be in bed with you.
Yeah, maybe I just don't like sex with you.
Yeah. Well, it's also, well, not even that they don't like sex with their partner, but that, I always say like foreplay begins at the end of the last sexual encounter. And if
Mm,
you're having all this
yeah.
conflict with your partner in
Right.
between, being very heterosexist here, often what I'll hear from women is, I need to feel emotionally close to move
Hmm.
into that sexual space with you. And if things have been unfriendly over the
Yeah.
last, week or 4 days or however long it's been,
Right.
then I don't really feel like doing that. And then often I hear men say, "Well, it's the physical connection that makes me feel close to you."
Yeah.
And so that is not always. I don't want to say nothing is 100% at all, but that's a frequent piece that I hear, a frequent
Right.
issue that I hear.
So taking that issue, um, for example, because I hear about that issue a lot too. Um, how do you counsel couples with that? I mean, I know what I tell people, but I'm not the
Uh-huh.
expert, so I want to know what you tell
Yeah.
them.
I'm curious as to what you tell them too.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll tell
Yeah.
them. I mean, you know, just in like being a woman and talking to my female friends and stuff, I'm like, you could you could end up in a standoff if you need to feel close in order to, to get intimate with your partner, and they need to get intimate with you to feel close. Like, it's just going to be a standoff. One of you has to give in. Just give in and see what happens,
Mm,
and you'll be pleasantly surprised.
yeah. Sometimes that works. That could work.
Okay, but it doesn't sound like all the time.
I often use the concept of willingness, which comes from sexual research. The concept of willingness, you may not feel aroused. Some people say, I just, women that are, they have little kids, they're busy all day. They're like,
Yeah.
they're people climbing on them all day. It's the last thing they want is someone else touching them.
Yeah.
But when you start with willingness, you don't have to start with arousal. Responsive desire follows, right? And so if there is no desire, you can still make an effort to engage by being willing. And then you're like, oh, yeah, this feels good. This is why I like to do this kind of thing in the first place. Um,
Right.
yeah. But another piece, a bigger piece, especially when a couple is very, I want to say conflictual, but it's not always conflictual. It doesn't always look like fight, fight, fight. It might look like one shuts down and one
Yeah.
pursues, or they both shut down and then they end up like circling in their own universes and they never come together.
Yeah.
So sometimes there has to be some couples work around the relationship. Often there has to be some couples work around the relationship
Right.
to kind of organize that differently so that they're getting along better, so that
Yeah.
they're not in this cycle of uh, discomfort that
Right.
makes them not feel like moving towards each other in an intimate way.
Right. And that is the caveat I would say to my, very harsh advice is, we all look at things through our own lens. And I think I've been very lucky to be in a healthy marriage for a while now. So I'm always looking at it through that lens, which perhaps is insensitive to people who are in relationships that maybe are more challenging and have some, bigger issues. So do you think when you're counseling couples and the issue of sex comes up as a source of conflict in their relationship, is it always about something else, or sometimes is it just as simple as like one person likes it more than the other, or something simple like that?
It could be that. It absolutely could be that. One person's drive, if you want to call it that, is just higher than the other person's. And then maybe there's some compromises. Maybe one person can agree to just masturbate more than and not include their partner in that. Or the partner may say, okay, well, I can be willing to do a little bit more. It's generally not as simple as that. There's always, I mean, we're complicated beings as humans, and so there's always more underneath. But sometimes that is part of it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is kind of a funny, maybe unconventional question, but how did you get over being able to talk about it and say all these words without giggling? Because it's really taking all of my restraint when you say these words not to giggle. But I have the maturity of like a 10-year-old, so.
Hey, I find bathroom humor very funny, so I understand.
Okay.
I totally understand. But you know what? If you think about it, they're really serious issues for these people.
Yes.
If they're being vulnerable enough to come
Yeah.
and say, we're having a problem. We haven't had sex in 10 years.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's that. Sometimes couples are really good friends. They're good co-parents. But they're just not having sex and they want to be physical. And so there's so much stigma around it that the more you can just sort of normalize it and talk about it and just help people not to feel there can be so much shame. You never know. When I do sexual histories with people, I'm always looking for, where did they get shaming messages around
Right.
sex? And
Yeah.
so there's a great deal of empathy and compassion that I hold. Like that, this isn't easy
Yeah.
for these folks to come here. And so, and the more that I can be at ease with it,
Yes.
the more that they can talk more freely, because I get it.
Yes.
I know how hard it is. For kinky couples, by the way, sex is much easier to talk about. It
I
is
bet.
because they have to, because there's so many rules that they really need to
Oh,
follow
okay.
to be safe, depending on
Oh,
what they like. And so
right.
sex is definitely much more on the table and open. Vanilla sex people could learn a lot from the kinky community as far as communicating about sex
Wow.
and what you want and what you don't want. And yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That is fascinating. Wow. Okay. Do you think it's possible to have, speaking of like sexless marriages, people haven't had sex in 10 years or whatever the case may be. Do you think it's possible for a marriage to be healthy and thriving without a sexual relationship?
It depends. I think
Okay.
that depends. Sometimes people aren't having sex. I don't see these people, but they're both okay with it.
Right. Yeah.
Neither
And I guess they
person
wouldn't. Yeah.
really
Hmm.
cares whether or not they're having sex or not.
Yeah.
But sometimes they're not okay with it. And whether or not they have the courage and the ability to be that vulnerable to come to therapy. Um, of course, I'm sure there's plenty of couples that aren't happy that I don't see, or I speak about sex therapists in general don't see, because
Yeah.
it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. But
Yeah.
can a marriage be healthy? Uh, I don't like to pathologize ever. I like to look at the strengths. So I think that people can have a lot of strengths in their relationship, and this can be a missing piece.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think there are Do you think the issues that couples are dealing with have changed over the years, or are you seeing the same issues that you've seen forever?
Um, in general, with couples, I think usually there's some betrayal of trust, like an affair, or someone was using substances. For me, it's usually an affair. I'm not a substance counselor, although I have worked with people where there's been substances, or we can't communicate. That's
Yeah.
another piece, or we're just always fighting. Or I think it's been generally pretty. I think what changes more is like the world, the context around us, like the issues the children are dealing with, or the issues that they're dealing with as far as, all the social media stuff. That's different when there wasn't social media. But
Right.
I think in general, people just not getting along. Texting is a big thing because, all these conversations are, it's not just like, well, you said, and then you said, no, no, no,
Yeah.
we texted. So look, I'll read you
Oh,
exactly.
here's Exhibit A right here. I am famous for that.
Yeah.
You said this? Oh, no, sir, you did not. I
Yeah.
have Exhibit A. Which you're probably going to tell me, Holly, that's not a healthy, way to handle your husband, but it's hard to be married to a lawyer.
Uh, Listen, if I had those skills, I would hold up Exhibit A. You're giving me some good ideas with my own marriage. Yeah. Yeah.
What's interesting though is my husband's a fireman, so he's gone a lot, and a lot of our conversations have actually been over text.
Mm.
And he actually communicates so much better in writing that
Ah,
I think it's actually been very helpful to us,
yeah.
because in person he's very much more likely to shut down. But if we're texting, he's able to express himself. So when you mention like a lot of these conversations are in texting, is that usually a hindrance to the couple, or what are your thoughts on that?
It depends. So in this case, so with you and your husband, I imagine that the pattern that you would be in if you do have a disagreement or something is that you're kind of pursuing for connection, for conversation, and he shuts down, right? So if he
In
in,
person,
in
yes.
person, so if he
Yes.
found a way to stay present and be able to communicate his feelings,
Hmm.
that's a huge strength. If he
Yeah.
can just say to you, Holly, you know what, I can't have this conversation, but I'm going to write out to you what I feel.
Yeah.
And then you can take that in and appreciate that. That's very good.
Hmm.
That's a really good use of text.
Yeah.
Sometimes people go back and forth in text, but you can't read the tone and you can't read,
Hmm. Right.
so many things, the body
Yeah.
language, how it's said. So it really depends. I had a couple recently I was sitting with, and I heard the whole text thread, and they're just saying, yeah, we don't do well on text. We misread, we miscommunicate, we
Yeah.
just don't do well on text. But
Yeah.
in the case for you and your husband, it sounds like a strength in a way that you have found, especially that he has found to stay present when
Hmm.
he usually shuts down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just an additional funny side note. I was looking for Exhibit A and looking back through all the things, and I thought, wow, we fight so lovingly. Because it's
Uh-huh.
like,
How
well, yes, I
nice.
respect your position, but.
That's so
And so,
nice. Yeah.
yeah. So, anyways, um, what, so for people that, you work with couples who have already been married and maybe for some length of time, and they're finding issues are popping up like discrepancy in desire and things like that. But for people that are maybe just dating and or in the very early stages of their marriage, what advice would you give to them to kind of head off these issues?
That's a great question. I think that communication is really important. And by that, I mean, talking about it. Don't let it get to the point where it is, been longer than either of you want, or if you're feeling distant, talk about it. Make an effort. make an effort to go to bed together at the same time. I'm not saying that that's to have sex, but it's time. Oftentimes I see couples and they talk about their busy days and this and this. And I was like, well, when do the two of you even talk? When do you catch
Yeah.
up at the end of the day? Like you've had this whole world happening for the last 10 hours and you've had this
Yeah.
whole world happening. When do you even talk to each other about it? And so I think staying connected, making time for each other, I know the kids take priority, but so does the relationship.
Yeah.
And if you really that would probably be one of the biggest things. Make time for the two of you, and in a way where, so for you and your husband, Holly, the two of you have found a way to communicate lovingly and kindly to each other, so you listen and you hear each other. So that's another piece that is so important. I know I've said it many times to people, but the more I was just thinking about this recently and how important it is that when we listen to our partner, we listen to hear them, not to respond.
Yeah.
We'll have our turn to respond,
Hmm.
or but and validate our partner. So if they say something, well, you forgot to do that for me, and like I can't believe you did that, and then you automatically start defending, then
Yeah.
you don't see how upset that person is. But
Right.
if you pause for a moment and you say, I see how upset you are that I forgot to stop and get your dry cleaning. I'm really sorry. I know you needed that, and it's a huge problem, and I'm
Hmm.
really sorry.
Yeah.
And when I was leaving work, this happened or whatever, and it's not right, but I apologize. But see them where they are first,
Right.
validate them. You may not agree with them, but you can still say, I see you where you are, and I see you in the space you're in, and it's really hard, and you're really upset right now.
Yeah.
And and so you're really tuning into what somebody feels. It
Right.
makes a huge difference. So finding time for each other, no matter how busy the day gets. Don't
Yeah.
fall asleep on the couch watching TV. Go to bed with your partner. That I find that time at night, where you're just kind of brushing your teeth together, getting ready for bed together, just talking about stuff. In my case, my children are grown and grown and gone, and in their own lives, they're all launched. But even when they're young, uh, they're in bed already if they're younger,
Yeah.
or they're not in bed yet because you go to bed before them because they're in high school and
Hmm.
they're going to, you reach that point where it's like, okay,
Yes.
good night. But
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, but
Yes.
it's a little time together, for
Hmm.
the two of you at the end of the day where you can catch up and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I want to ask you more about, kids being a priority, because something that, again, I've been a divorce lawyer for almost 2 decades now. And so I've had I would say the privilege and the advantage of seeing what works and what doesn't work for thousands of couples.
yeah,
And I've tried to really learn a lot from that. And one of the things that I've seen, and I'm curious, I want to know, I want you to weigh in on it, is it seems like it's very detrimental when the kids are the priority in the household unit. When, and I think particularly it's like you start having babies and mom is really focused on those babies and dad sort of kind of feels left out to pasture. And then those patterns kind of persist even when the need from babies decreases.
yeah,
Now it seems like couples are kind of set in those patterns. And I feel like that's a big problem when, the kids are always sort of running the show and the priority in the household and not the marriage. What do you say about that?
yeah. I agree. The kids can't run the show.
Yeah.
It's both and. Yes, of course, our children's safety and well-being and their needs come first, and it's really important to make time for each other,
Yeah.
and to hear each other. It's not just date night. It's
Right.
more about how it goes between you. There are going to be differences of opinion, it's inevitable. Two adults
Yeah.
that live together day after day, year after year, there's going to be, things where you just think differently,
Yeah.
hear each other, really tune into each other. I always say to couples, it's not the goal of this work is not to never have another disagreement, but it's how it goes between you when that happens.
Mm.
And so if your partner is telling you, listen, I love our children just as much as you do, but I'm feeling a little neglected lately. And I even feel silly saying that because I know there are kids, but I need a little bit of you. Listen,
Mm.
listen to your partner. And
Yeah.
maybe it is as simple as, can you just come to bed a little earlier? Can you get off the phone with your friends and
Yeah.
just come be with me? This is our time that we have together. Turning towards each other when
Mhm.
there are issues in your life is also, speaking of friends, I think a lot of time women especially can end up turning towards
Yeah.
their friends or their sisters or their
Right.
mother. I once had a gentleman say to me, I'm jealous of my wife's relationship with her mom. And he
Mm.
was just wanting his partner to turn towards him, to talk to
Yeah.
him about what was going on
Mm.
in her life.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, kind of circling back to sex in particular, do you, because, in talking about communication and sort of relationship dynamics in general, I've heard you say a couple times, and I couldn't agree more, that it's so many times it's about really hearing each other and seeing the other person, like truly seeing them. Do you think that is the issue with the sex also?
Um, in part, it could be. In part, do you mean like with what somebody likes or?
Well, it's just like, let's again take the example of discrepancy in desire. It's like one person is saying, I would like to do this more. Um, at its core is, are they really saying like, I really want you to see my needs and my wants and respect them and acquiesce to them? I don't know. I'm
It could be. It could
okay.
be, but that gets really into the person's history.
Mm,
That gets into their family of origin. Were they ever
got it.
seen? Did they feel seen as a child? Did they feel like their needs were attended to? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's exactly a place where it could be a non-sexual piece of their history that informs how they feel in the sexual dynamic, that
Mm,
they might get so angry and upset when their partner does not want to engage in sex as much as they do or some kind of intimacy or whatever it might be.
yeah.
But it's more because it reminds them of their history where their needs were not met or cared about or attended to. So it's really very nuanced, and I really do deep dives into people's history. What was it like?
Yeah.
What was their relationship with their parents like? With their siblings? I think can have a big relationship, and we haven't even touched on if people have abuse in their
Right.
history, sexual abuse, or
Right.
that. Of course, that also can inform somebody's anxiety around moving into a sexual situation because
Right.
there was a time in life where they couldn't had no control over that,
Mm.
and so it can be very traumatic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, what, um, for couples, watching and listening, what is something that everybody could do today to make their relationship a little bit better?
um Sit down with your partner for 10 minutes at the end of the day. Put away your phones, put away all your electronics, and just look into each other's eyes and have a conversation.
Mm.
And listen, light a candle if you want, make it a ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Do something nice if there's certain like teacups, your coffee mugs you have, or you want to make it a glass of wine or whatever it is, a special time for the two of you, or you can even say, kids, mom and dad are talking now. And that's not neglecting your children will like that. They will see, oh, look, mom and dad are having a
Yeah.
special time together.
Mhm.
One of the questions I ask couples about is what kind of relationship did their parents have from their perspective? And
Yeah.
do they think their parents had sex?
Oh,
And, when people don't think their parents had sex or they didn't see any affection or closeness, that's not modeled for them. It's not, it's this foreign thing. So the history is really, really important. But I think, you know, making time for each other every day.
okay. I have a real zinger of a question to end with.
Or
Is it more damaging for kids to think their parents didn't have sex or for the kids to walk in on the parents having sex?
that happens a lot, when we do the sexual histories, sexual and relational histories. Um, I've often heard that people walked in on their parents.
Yeah.
I don't think that's as damaging as of course you hope that the parents then cover up,
Right. Yeah.
minimize it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but and they may not even know what it is
Yeah.
at that moment. Maybe they're just too young to understand, but
Right.
it does happen. I think, again, damaging. I don't think it's damaging. I think it is. Just one of those experiences people have, and then you say, well, how do you think that informs you as
Got
a
it.
you as a sexual being as you've
Right.
gone forward?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So parents that has happened to everywhere, they can rest easy that they haven't damaged their children
They haven't
completely.
damaged their children.
Yeah.
They're maybe a little embarrassed. Everybody may feel a little bit embarrassed, but they're okay. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Well, Wendy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes. I've got just a little bit more to say. What is becoming so clear to me with all the episodes that we are doing is whether it's sex or relationships or couples or DEI or employment, we all just want to be seen and heard. And so if you feel like you're not being seen and heard, communicate that to whoever needs to hear it, your partner, your employer, your boss, whatever the case may be, because you were made for more.